Hey there, vinyl community. So I want to do a video for the Acid Archives, um, Seeking the Thread. Did a thread on the on this great book that's out there on Acid Archives, which is kind of obscure psychedelic era bands. Really interesting book. I don't have it, but I've been kind of flipping through it online, and yeah, it's definitely worth picking up. So maybe have to get a hold of that at some point. But I struggled more finding an album that I had on the list than I thought I would. I thought for sure I would, find something pretty easy. It seemed like most of the stuff I had from that era was more garage orientated, and not quite so on the kind of psychedelic end of it. And then when I did have psychedelic stuff, it was probably more obvious type stuff. But I did eventually, of course, find a record, and maybe if you can hear in the background, 1975, Ted Lucas. And yeah, this is a great album, and I had a pretty cool, kind of a interesting history with this record. When I was in college and used to collect records, you used to see that record around a little bit. And I can remember there was a couple of stores in the Ann Arbor area that had them on the wall, had that album on the wall. And I remember inquiring about it, and interestingly enough, I had been in Ann Arbor hunting with a friend for records, and saw it on the wall, and it was like $50. Keep in mind that back then $50 was a fortune for a record, and we passed on it and found some other stuff. And I remember a few days later, I kind of got an itching for it, and was familiarizing myself with the record, and called the store. And the guy goes, "It's so funny that you're calling right now." He goes, "Because that record has been up on the wall for years. And yesterday, somebody walked in the store and bought it. And now today you're calling and inquiring about the record." So I came about that close to an original. And it was out of print for a while. Eventually it got a nice reissue on Yoga. There's another reissue out right now it's not hard to find anymore. People have kind of discovered this record. It's got a great hippie vibe about it. Just a real sincere simplicity to it. That as you can hear in the background Ted talking about how nice it is to get stoned. But the making of the record, Ted had a pretty troubled. He was a musician with Motown, from what I remember reading, and played a lot of their more psychedelic instruments whenever they needed somebody, and then eventually went to California, had a series of bands, nothing that really took off. Some of them are kind of, semi-well-known, I guess. Never really had any major success. Ended up coming back to Detroit, where he had family. He had two boys, and I guess there was, the one thing about Ted was, in addition to his drug use, there was he struggled with issues of mental illness too. And I guess, one of the problems that became with getting the album reissued was his sons were really not keen on it. And they had some bad memories of their dad, that I guess they had pretty unstable lives because he never had any money, and they were always, struggling, and he was kind of a wheeler and dealer, always trying to make a buck over here, a buck over there, doing this or that, and it just didn't make for a very stable background. And eventually, when they started to see, I guess there was an interview that I read with his one son where he said, we had some old albums of my dad's in the attic, and to make a few extra bucks, we put them up on eBay. And he said, and they sold instant. Like he goes, everything was gone. And that's when he goes, we realized that, ooh, there are people out there who dig what Dad was doing. And then they got approached by some people, record label people. And there's also an interesting story about how Lucas had been when he did this is his one and only solo record. But when he did it, that he had been approached by a major label who thought he was a talented guy and wrote some great songs. And this was like in the very early, like 1970, 1971. And this kind of singer-songwriter stuff was like becoming really popular. And so Ted, they said, in my dad's typical way of doing things, rather than getting the record company something back right away so that hey, who knows, maybe struck a deal. It took 3 years, and eventually he sent the record guy back a demo tape, and the guy said, it's great, it's good. He goes, but it's too late. We're on to the singer-songwriter thing is over, and we're on to something new. And eventually ended up doing an independent release of it. And so yeah, it was oddly enough, I remember in my early days of record collecting, seeing it around. It just wasn't on my radar screen as far as something that I was into until that it was just a little bit too late. So great record. And I think if this is not like a really obscure record anymore. At one time it was. This was a really, I remember, you mentioned Ted Lucas and people didn't know who you were talking about. Today it's fairly well known, and it's fairly easily obtainable. There's been this reissue and then a more recent reissue too. So not hard to get. Originals, however, pretty tough to get. So do as you think accordingly is the right thing to do. And cool that Seeking a Thread down did this Acid Archive, a really cool book. And if you want to go online, you can find, there's some PDFs where you can at least flip through the bands and read a little description of each one of them. And it's a pretty fascinating little book that I think can take you down the rabbit hole of obscure psychedelic pretty well. Anyway, try to keep this short. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.